The following is a review for critical, analytical, and educational purposes only, and is protected under Article 17 and 107 in the United States Fair Use Code. This video is not an infringement on copyright. Please enjoy the video.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Trilbee, and today we're going to be doing a review-a-thon. That's right, the 87th Academy Awards are taking place this weekend at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles, and this year we have 8 Best Picture nominees. We have American Sniper, Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, Boyhood, The Grand Budapest Hotel, The Imitation Game, Selma, The Theory of Everything, and Whiplash. Yes, I got them all right. Now, many of you already know my thoughts on these films, whether it be video reviews or written reviews on my website, but this video was just to sort of have everything in one neat package, to just condense my thoughts and let you all know what I think of the Best Picture nominees. Are all of these movies deserving of the Best Picture label? Well, let's find out, starting off with a movie that most definitely is not. American Sniper.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. Would you be surprised if I told you that the Navy has credited you with over 160 kills?
Based off the biography and the life of Chris Kyle, American Sniper follows Chris Kyle's childhood, his enlistment and training into the Navy SEALs, his 4 tours of Afghanistan, as well as his treatment back home. When it comes to the premise, it sounds great. Snipers have an intimate relationship with the conflict, and a lot rests on their hands to defend soldiers, make important judgment calls, and it requires an insane amount of patience. It's just a shame that director Clint Eastwood, who disappointed last year with Jersey Boys as well, has made easily the weakest movie nominated for any award this year, let alone Best Picture. The main problem with American Sniper is that it's portrayed so matter-of-factly to a fault. The movie is astonishingly simple-minded, and while that trademark Eastwood approach has worked in the past, here it's the movie's undoing. American Sniper offers no perspective, viewpoint, opinion, or any sort of reflection on the War on Terror, or the decade US troops spent in the Middle East fighting a war that, objectively speaking, didn't really accomplish much when all is said and done. American Sniper condenses a highly political topic into a by-the-numbers action film that is so singularly arch in its depiction on the conflict that it can only be described as disturbingly patriotic. Why does Chris Kyle enlist in the SEALs? Because he loves America just that much, even though he's leaving his struggling, grieving wife behind with his 2 children. See, when it's portrayed so matter-of-factly like that, it's hard to root for Chris Kyle as a father because he's constantly abandoning his family to go and do another tour of Afghanistan. A smarter movie would explore why he does that, why Chris Kyle is so compelled to go back to the Middle East, but American Sniper doesn't even attempt to do that. One scene has Chris Kyle at home watching the conflict unfold on television and seeing soldiers get taken out by sniper fire before decrying their enemies as savages and evil, but that's painting the complex, decade-long endeavour into stark black and white terms, which simply cannot be done with this type of story. As far as American Sniper is concerned, anyone living in a vague desert city that is not America is quote-unquote evil, because they're not from America, I guess. There's one scene where Chris and a small group of SEALs take refuge in a home in Afghanistan, where the family there offered them a meal. This initially seems to indicate that even people in the middle of the conflict where the warfare is taking place are friendly and that they don't want any part in the fight. Until it turns out the father is storing more weapons and ammunition than Arthur Webley in Hot Fuzz under his bed, because of course he is. The movie is so determined to draw such a defined line between the good guys and the bad guys, quote unquote, that American Sniper creates a supervillain called the Butcher, who tortures children with power drills and stores chopped up body parts in large freezers. The Butcher is an entirely fictional creation of the movie, because of course he is. The sequence in the film's most memorable trailer has Chris Kyle decide whether or not to shoot a child that has been given a grenade by his mother. Despite it being a prominent scene in the marketing and in the movie itself, it is an entirely fictional event written specifically for the movie American Sniper, where it's meant to say, see everyone, even the kids in Afghanistan are evil. Because you know the drill. On the other hand, American Sniper being so determined to strong-arm its viewers into disliking its antagonists, it becomes difficult to root for the SEALs themselves because they're so two-dimensional and cliché. There is no sense of companionship or camaraderie with Kyle or any of his fellow soldiers or superiors. American Sniper, despite its large cast, globe-hopping narrative and many frequent gunfights, is an absolute slog to sit through because we are simply given no reason to get invested in these characters, and the narrative is so simplistic simplistically banal that its runtime of 133 minutes feels like an eternity. Chris Kyle spends time with his family, goes on tour, makes shots, loses comrades, goes home, lather, rinse, repeat. The only thing that breaks this mold is in the last 15 minutes, when he goes home, retires, overcomes his PTSD off-screen before his death, which is reduced to a single on-screen sentence before the credits roll. His death is also off-screen. Now, Chris Kyle fought in the Middle East for over 1,000 days to protect America, racked up hundreds of kills, got involved in many gun battles and lost many friends in the conflict. He also survived 3 gunshot wounds, 2 helicopter crashes, 6 IED attacks, as well as numerous surgeries, none of which are shown or even hinted at in the movie because it's not interested in making an effort. He then overcomes the trauma that came with his time there, before getting murdered in his homeland by a single lone American, a single lone nut with a gun who he was trying to help. You cannot ignore the politics there, but Clint Eastwood does, and with respect to Eastwood, who has had a great and storied career involved in movies, that is cowardly. You cannot end a movie about Chris Kyle's life like that. It's so abrupt and so poorly handled, it almost seems like a misguided SNL sketch. Yeah, this man fought for and defended America. Yeah, roll credits. Oh yeah, he was also killed by an American, but we'll forget about that part because America! Speaking of mishandled comedy sketches, the production values of American Sniper are a joke. Despite costing $60 million to put together, the shot composition and camera work are completely by the numbers, and the action scenes have no weight, despite some admittedly well done gore effects. The gun sound effects are good, but they're clearly out of sync with the actual shots fired. And this movie was nominated for Best Sound Editing, people. How the hell does that even happen? The special effects are terrible at best. The green screen behind actors talking in an airborne helicopter looks like it was done by a no-budget YouTuber, and one entirely CGI shot of a dead enemy soldier in a sandstorm with a 2D face poorly stuck onto a 3D body was the second most unintentionally funny moment of the movie. The most unintentionally funny moment of the movie comes from Bradley Cooper using his huge sausage fingers to deliberately move a fake baby's arm. Is there anything good about American Sniper? Well, Bradley Cooper and Sienna Miller are good, the makeup effects are strong, and there are a small handful of tense sequences, though they could have been so much more in more capable hands, or at least in the hands of a filmmaker that cared. The fact of the matter is that American Sniper has nothing to say, and it doesn't even try to make any sort of point or statement about Chris Kyle's life or the war he was involved in, and that's the biggest cinematic crime that this film commits. It's a stunningly mismanaged movie that is getting a lot of awards buzz, because of course it is. I give American Sniper 1 star out of 5.
I'm ready.
Oh my god!
I'm ready to come home.
Next up, we have the superhero deconstruction movie Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. Ironically, Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance is the first superhero movie to be nominated for Best Picture. Now, does Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance soar, or does it crash land? Let's find out.
You were the original, man. Let's make a comeback. That's what I'm talking about. You're Birdman. You are a god.
Hey! Is this for real, or are you shooting a film?
A film!
You people are full of shit!
In the late 1980s, Tim Burton directed one of the most influential blockbusters of all time, Batman. At the time of its release, it was one of the highest grossing movies ever made, and it reshaped the mainstream movie-going landscape. It also sparked off a comic book adaptation revolution, the effects of which are still being felt to this day, with at least 30 high-profile comic book superhero movies being released between 2013 and 2020. Batman starred Michael Keaton as the titular Caped Crusader, and now, over 20 years later, he's also playing the lead role here in Birdman. Michael Keaton plays Regan Thompson, a former Hollywood actor who was famous for starring in a fictional movie trilogy as the superhero Birdman. 20 years after walking away from the multi-billion-dollar franchise, Thompson is hoping to gain some credibility by directing and writing a high-profile Broadway production, which he also plans to star in. Birdman follows Thompson in the lead-up to the show's opening night as he starts to balk under the pressure as his family, cast, and friends start to show concerns for his behaviour. The technical conceit of Birdman is that it's shot to resemble one long continuous take. While some of the cuts between the 5 or 10 minute takes are frequently easy to spot, its effectiveness cannot be understated. Usually directors and cinematographers attempt to film scenes in one take just to show off, but Birdman uses this concept to get into the relentless headspace of its main character. Regan Thompson's Broadway show opens in 3 to 4 days after the movie starts, and as the takes get longer and the theatre previews are progressing, there's the sense of impending doom as the clock metaphorically ticks down, and opening night draws closer and closer. As an audience member, it's easy to feel Regan's frustration as he's placed everything on the line for this production, and you experience all of the problems that he encounters in faux real time. That's right, while the movie attempts to give the illusion of a single take, Birdman does not take place in real time. Frequently, the movie will transition to the next day by panning across a wall or pointing the camera towards the sky for a time-lapse to represent the passage of time. It's a deceptively simple concept, but it works wonders for having the audience relate to Regan and get into his headspace, but it's also in no small part thanks to Keaton's Oscar-caliber performance. This could potentially be the best performance of Keaton's career, as his character truly runs the gamut of emotions, and the fact that he's transitioning from them in a faux real-time aspect shows his state of mind deteriorate before your eyes. He's sympathetic but also tough to love, as he's not really doing this Broadway production for the right reasons, and Keaton's natural likability as one of our most underrated character actors allows Regan to walk that thin line. While this is unquestionably Keaton's show and he holds together the enterprise, the supporting cast are terrific as well, with Emma Stone, Edward Norton, and even Zach Galifianakis giving career best work. Now, before I proceed, I must stress this point. I really like Birdman. It's got a terrific, naturalistic screenplay with brilliant dialogue, great performances, and thought-provoking subject matter concerning the dualities that each of the main characters are dealing with. It's an impressive character study for Regan as he tries to cope with being a washed-up actor, and it's incredibly well filmed and a technical marvel. However, what trips up Birdman from being a true 5-star masterpiece is its petty nature. Let me explain. Birdman specifically has its eyes set on modern comic book movies, not just mindless blockbusters in general, as the movie Birdman, and by proxy its director and co-writer Alejandro González Iñárritu, are focusing on comic book movies exclusively due to its casting decisions, scathing lines of dialogue early on, and a strangely out-of-place artsy dream sequence near the end. There's a hallucination sequence that starts the third act, where Birdman flies in front of the camera, stares directly at it, and says,
Look at their eyes, they're all sparkling. They love this shit, they love blood, they love action. Not this talky, depressing, philosophical bullshit.
Now, let me make something clear. I am not a fan of superhero movies. I'm a fan of good movies. If a movie is good, it doesn't matter where its source material came from. It doesn't matter that it came from a comic book. I praised the hell out of Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers Assemble, and The Dark Knight, but The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Superman 4 The Quest for Peace, and X-Men Origins Wolverine, those films can suck it. However, Birdman seems to decry the mere existence of these comic book action movies and questions if an actor is starring in a movie like that, then are they really an actor? Here's the thing though, not only is Birdman and its director decrying the existence of movies that don't even exist anymore, but when those types of movies did exist, they paid the price by getting poor box office returns. They failed in the end. Marvel Studios, with their recent run of movies, as well as Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, have done a terrific job at giving the audience dramatic themes, compelling characters, and stories that resonate. Guardians of the Galaxy last year didn't become one of the highest grossing films in America because it had blood or mindless action. It resonated with people because they loved the characters, their arcs, and the themes the film presented of where home truly is, and how a group of people can be in a universe so full of character but still feel so utterly alone. Captain America the Winter Soldier laid down the hard-to-learn lesson of not trusting authority, The Dark Knight analysed the pros and cons of order and chaos, and Iron Man 3 followed the rebuilding of a man who was literally carrying around the baggage of his past. This is the current comic book movie landscape. These are the movies that Alejandro is chastising and calling out for being watered down and mindless. Iñárritu may have had a point in the 1990s with Batman and Robin or Steel or The Phantom, but even if Birdman was referencing that time capsule of movies, which it isn't by the way, because Robert Downey Jr.'s success in the Iron Man films is directly referenced, as well as Jeremy Renner, those movies not only did incredibly poorly at the box office, but their infamous legacies are ones that the movie studios that made them and the actors who starred in them would rather forget. Ask George Clooney how he feels about Batman and Robin if you ever meet him. It feels like director Alejandro González Iñárritu is complaining about movies that he hasn't even seen, and that makes Birdman come across as incredibly petty. Another stumble on the part of the movie is Lindsay Duncan as an influential theatre critic who promises to give Riggins' production a bad review, just because, and because she's going to give it a bad review, it essentially means that his production will be taken off Broadway, and the entire success of Riggins' show will hinge entirely on her review. This is one of the straws that breaks the camel's back for Riggins' emotional breakdown towards the end, but the problem is that Birdman explicitly exists in the 21st century. Social media runs rampant, it's directly referenced, and superhero movies are the top dog of the entertainment world, as referenced in this movie. As a result, the existence of an influential theatre critic of this nature in this universe, not to mention one who will drop all professionalism and honesty because of poorly defined personal biases, yet somehow have become influential in the first place, doesn't ring true for a moment. This wouldn't be much of a problem, but because her scene with Riggin in a Broadway bar is one of the biggest turning points for the story, it needs credibility, and it simply doesn't work. A long but memorable rant from Riggin at the critic feels like director Alejandro chastising any prior critics of his work as opposed to something that's genuinely coming from the character. After all, the fictional Birdman movies seem to be beloved by audience members over 20 years after they were released in this movie. Popular mainstream blockbusters simply do not earn that long-time admiration without being critically well received. We still talk about Die Hard after almost 30 years, but no one talks about Transformers from 8 years ago, for example. However, all that being said, Birdman is technically incredible, with brilliant camera work, a near perfectly handled filming conceit with a phenomenal improvised jazz drum track underscoring the film, adding intensity to already brilliant actors working with a natural script. It's a great must-see movie, despite its almost immature and grossly misinformed intentions. The superhero movie has grown up a lot in the past decade, and audiences have responded for very good reason, but Birdman seems to willfully fly in the face of that progress for egotistical reasons on the part of director Alejandro González Iñárritu, who seems to be flying completely blind with that approach. But on a technical and artistic filmmaking level, Birdman is, well, it's hard to fault. I give Birdman, or the unexpected virtue of ignorance of the director, 4 stars out of 5.
Why don't you get your wings in your bird suit, man?
Ah! Hey! Try to fake me! No! Ow! Crab up on your ass and choke you out! I'm gonna choke you out!
Phew, now that was a long review, but not as long as this movie took to make. We have Boyhood, which is a frontrunner for Best Picture. And why wouldn't it be a frontrunner? It took 12 years to make. Did you know? Did you know that it took 12 years to make? Let's have a look at Boyhood. Filmed over the course of 12 years, director Linklater in 2002 cast L.R. Coltrane as Mason, and we follow his growth and his childhood as he learns about life, himself, and the changing relationships with his family. It sounds like an awesome idea, and you cannot fault Linklater for taking that approach. This cannot have been easy to put together or make, but it doesn't really work as a character study. In fact, despite all of the heaps of praise lumped upon Boyhood, it seems like nothing more than wallpaper media, in that it's something nice to have on in the background as noise because there's no substance to it. You see, Boyhood gets some details absolutely right, and there are some awesome isolated moments. Mason watching Dragon Ball Z was something very relatable to me personally, getting into fights with his siblings in the car and his mother asking them to put a barrier up, laying in the middle of a trampoline as other kids bounce you around for fun, nervous conversations with girls as puberty sets in. Those are great moments that I do relate to, but Boyhood, despite its incredible runtime of 2 hours and 45 minutes, doesn't let some of the key moments of childhood sink in. There's a scene of Mason learning how to shoot a gun that goes on for no joke about 10 minutes, but important life-changing moments like Mason being forced to move home and leave behind all of his friends and adapt to a new place is about 30 seconds of screen time. We see Mason's mother flirt with her college professor, he asks her out on a date, and the very next scene has jumped ahead a year or two, and the two families have moved in together and have integrated. What the hell happened in between that? There's a lot of potential material there. How did Mason's dad react, his real dad? Did Mason initially get along with his new family? Nah, forget that, let's just move on. The movie has very warped priorities like that. There's a few minutes dedicated to Mason's family stripping their old home of the paint and personal touches, but nothing about settling into their brand new home. Despite its incredible length, it feels incomplete. Now, I understand that not everyone will have the same childhood, of course not. Like I said, I related to things in this movie that others might not, and that's fair enough and is to be expected and is not the fault of the movie. But I want to see this boy's childhood and the defining moments of this kid's life, and it feels like we don't get that. Mason just rides along with everything as opposed to being proactive. He feels like a bystander in his own life, and that's boring to watch. The gimmick of seeing the cast grow up on screen takes the movie far for about an hour, but when you realise that you have another 2 hours to go, then you start to see the strings attached, such as the lackluster editing, the clunky transitions, the flat direction, and the fact that a lot of shots are actually out of focus. Yes, this may be hypocrisy because my last big media project had a few out of focus shots, but that was a student film made for £200 in 4 days. This is a Oscar contender by a critically acclaimed director that got a release. There's no excuse for out of focus shots, not to mention the weak child acting, which is strange because Richard Linklater directed School of Rock and that had great child acting. While Mason is a good child actor between the ages of around 7 and 12, once he reaches his teens he either loses the acting ability or just stops trying. That could be due to the script because Mason is the least interesting character in Boyhood, and especially once he reaches his teens. He's just not that interesting of a character, and because the movie almost entirely hinges on him, this is a big problem. It also doesn't help that Mason's sister Samantha is incredibly annoying, not the endearing, relatable way that young girls can be so you tolerate it, but in a screenplay sense of, how annoying can we make this brat? The performance isn't that great either. It's like they got the director's daughter or something. Anyway, the adult cast members do most of the heavy lifting, with Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette who play the divorced parents. Hawke in particular is great as the dad trying way too hard to make amends when the kids are young before maturing and becoming actually more of an uncle character as the story progresses. These two actors are brilliant in the movie and more than deserving of the awards buzz they're getting, not just because of their 12-year commitment to the project, but because they actually elevate the material. Because let's face facts here, these incredibly frequent speeches that the two characters deliver about life, the universe and everything, those aren't words that actual human beings say, okay? Those are speeches meticulously crafted by Richard Linklater to try and sound profound. The fact that Ethan and Patricia can make material like that actually work is commendable, and without those two actors, Boyhood would be half the movie it is. But what's strange about Boyhood is that despite the 12 years, the hours of screen time, the massive cast of characters and the ambition, it doesn't seem to have anything to say about Boyhood or life in general, other than, yeah, life goes by quickly. It's literally no exaggeration to say that Richard Linklater's School of Rock from 2003 genuinely says more about childhood, growing up, and emotional maturity than Boyhood does. Yes, School of Rock, the movie where Jack Black starts a kid rock band in a school, has more to say than Boyhood, the movie that is currently the favourite to win Best Picture. Where the hell is School of Rock's Best Picture trophy? Also, the gimmick of seeing characters grow up on screen isn't even that unique. Despite what the poster would say, this has been done before, and done better. The Harry Potter franchise, almost every long-lasting TV show, the 7-Up documentary series, Linklater's own Before movies, and movies have had longer production cycles than Boyhood has, such as The Thief and the Cobbler, Typhland, and even Avatar. Boyhood isn't that unique. No, we have not seen a cast of characters grow up in a self-contained piece of media, but what does that matter if the media doesn't even have that much to say, and the main character is a total blank slate? It feels like a wasted opportunity, through and through. The Harry Potter franchise not only saw the cast of characters grow, change and age in almost real time thanks to the conceit of each movie taking place over the course of a school year and almost released yearly, but its characters were ones that were worth getting invested in. They had stories, arcs and an overall goal. Boyhood doesn't have that, and that's why it's ideal wallpaper media. Yes, these characters went to a midnight opening of a Harry Potter book just like I did. That's great. Now let's focus on who these people are, not what they did. The worst crime of all, though, is that after spending 12 years with these people, after seeing them grow up on screen, I couldn't remember any of their names. I actually had to resort to Wikipedia to find out their characters' names. If a movie is meant to be a character study, or an exercise in attachment to these people over an extended period of time, or a slice-of-life movie as opposed to a beginning, middle and end narrative, it kinda helps if you actually know who these people are on a basic level. I give Boyhood 2.5 stars out of 5.
What do you want to be, Mason? What do you want to do?
Next up we have the Grand Budapest Hotel. Here's the thing though, I've already reviewed the Grand Budapest Hotel in video format, and having seen it 3 times since its release, my thoughts have not changed, like, at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun that review, going to stay here, have a cup of tea, and wait for all this to blow over. Enjoy. Wes Anderson is a filmmaker that I've respected more than I've actually liked. There's no denying that he has a distinct style, which is more than can be said for most filmmakers today, but sometimes he forgets to apply interesting characters or a compelling narrative onto that style. And while his best film, Fantastic Mr. Fox, did manage to do that, it's mainly because it so closely followed its brilliant source material. Seriously, if you haven't read the book or seen the film, you should fix both of those. So it comes with great relief that I can say the Grand Budapest Hotel is his best original film to date, mainly because it excels at one of the aspects that he has been slacking off with in previous films, and that is character. This is an utterly charming movie. There are 3 separate stories in the film, but the main one follows Ray Fiennes and newcomer Tony Revolori as they get into numerous escapades involving a conspiracy, a mystery plot concerning an inheritance murder, and lots of other stuff. Really, the plot is kind of superfluous, and it's mainly an excuse for set-piece moments for Wes Anderson to show off his quirky style. Thankfully, in this case, it works in his favour, because the dialogue and performances help to complement this style. The cast are too numerous to name, but all of them have wholly committed to Anderson's aesthetics. Their voices, delivery, subtle facial expressions and mannerisms, they all feel choreographed and tweaked to perfection, and everything feels deliberate, which works in this context. Everything from the use of practical models, well, they at least look like practical models, obvious green screen, or at least it looks like green screen, and the ever-changing aspect ratio based on the time period helps to add to the feel of the movie. Whatever complaints I have about the Grand Budapest Hotel, there's nothing in 2014 so far that quite feels like the Grand Budapest Hotel. So what are these complaints? Well, the movie clocks in at a relatively modest 99 minutes, but the movie still feels a bit too long. The film's energy is so manic that it struggles to maintain its hectic pace throughout. There's a 15 or 20 minute period of the film between the second and third act where the pacing grinds to a screeching halt. I won't give any spoilers, but it was between the prison break and the ski chase where the film just completely lost momentum for me. Also, there are 3 different narratives. One takes place in the present, the second takes place in the 60s, and the third takes place in the 30s. The narrative in the 30s is where 90% of the movie takes place, but the other time periods just don't feel necessary and they feel like padding. I know it's there to deliver a revelation about the importance of the hotel, and it's meant to be emotional and impactful, but the movie had such a detached style and unique aesthetic that when the final reveal happened, I was so uninvolved emotionally that it just utterly fell flat. It's kinda hard to care about the people involved when the movie doesn't portray them as normal people or inhabitants of a world that runs on logic just because the movie tells you to. However, in terms of recommending the movie, then yeah, I can absolutely recommend it. It just feels like its attempts at pathos and its narrative ambitions just feel massively out of place in such an alien feeling movie. But there's nothing out in theatres quite like it, and it's gut-bustingly funny at points. It's easily the funniest live-action movie of the year so far, and it's worth seeing just to experience it. I give the Grand Budapest Hotel 4 stars out of 5.
I became his pupil, and he was to be my counselor and guardian.
The police are here. Tell them I'll be right down.
She's been murdered, and you think I did it.
Hey! Stop! That's some good Yorkshire tea. Like I said, I don't mind rerunning that review of the Grand Budapest Hotel because having seen the movie since I reviewed it, my thoughts haven't changed one iota. I just wish that maybe in that review I'd mentioned Ralph Fiennes' performance more, because it is a great performance and I wish it got more awards recognition. But speaking of great performances, we have Benedict Cumberbatch giving one of his career best works in The Imitation Game, so let's take a look at that and be very British while we do it. Keep buggering on.
What did you do during the war?
I worked in a radio factory.
What did you really do during the war?
Are you paying attention?
History often perceives wars as being fought almost exclusively on the battlefield, that the conflicts come from leaders, both political and military, sending young souls headlong into battle, armed with firearms and vigour. It's often thought to be like that because that's the more quote-unquote exciting version of war, where there's a lot of action, heroism and drama. However, sometimes the most brutal wars can be fought internally and in secrecy, where said battles are planned and directed in small huts in the countryside by those who never fire a shot. When focusing on this side of World War II, you need to have a compelling character in the centre of it, and there are few that are more compelling than Alan Turing, the man who cracked the German code Enigma, and is often credited as being one of the biggest contributors to the Allied forces winning the war. But he was a man with secrets, and those secrets ultimately cost him his life. It's not a happy story, but it's one The Imitation Game tells beautifully, bringing us possibly one of the best British films of last year. Despite being a first-time screenwriter, Graham Moore handles the three-pronged narrative of The Imitation Game deftly, and manages to weave three incredibly engaging multifaceted plots which help to complement each other, these narratives being Alan Turing's childhood, his work in World War II, and his final days. This is chiefly helped by Oscar-caliber editing by William Goldenberg, who splices in these clips to not only be relevant, but to parcel out information to the viewer at a rate which helps give each segment time to breathe and relevance in the moment. Alan Turing is played phenomenally well by Benedict Cumberbatch. Cumberbatch has played arrogant, socially awkward geniuses before, but coupled with the amazing screenplay, he is able to imbue Turing with an incredible level of warmth and humanity when the scene requires it. There is one sequence when Turing, who is eager to make friends but not having any sort of basic grasp on how to go about it, gives his work colleagues an apple each and attempts to tell a joke. It's a scene that ultimately adds nothing to the plot of the movie and is played for comedy, but it's not the movie laughing at Turing, it's to show that he wants to actively interact with people and show affection, but he struggles to understand society's norms. Cumberbatch almost disappears into the role, and thanks to incorporating Turing's stammer, a slightly hunched physicality, and the changes to his body towards the end as he nears his final days, it's probably the best performance of his already incredible career, and while we're not sure if he's going to take home the Oscar this year, it's a safe bet that this will not be his last nomination. The supporting cast are also very strong, with Keira Knightley playing Turing's romantic interest and best friend Joan Clark. Those looking for historical perfection in her casting may cry foul, as Clark is known to have been quite plain in real life, but Knightley brings a lot to the role of someone who, like Turing, finds it difficult to be taken seriously in the 1940s because of who she is. In her first scene, she's mistaken for a receptionist as opposed to someone who was applied to work as a cryptographer, which immediately places this incredibly bright individual far under the glass ceiling. Mark Strong, Rory Kinnear, Matthew Goode and Charles Dance also help to round out a great ensemble cast, though it would be remiss of me to ignore Alex Lawther, who plays Turing during the childhood segments. It is one of the best child performances that I have seen in a long time, and when it comes to one particular scene where the focus is entirely on his reaction to a traumatic event, Lawther truly rises to the occasion. Also, if there's one thing the UK media industry knows how to do, it's historical productions, so naturally when it comes to putting the audience in World War II, The Imitation Game does a brilliant job on a production level despite some sketchy CGI. The score by Alexander Desplat brings out his strengths as a composer, and Desplat's mastery of utilising strings and percussion makes him a brilliant mood setter and tension builder with action-light narratives. The fact that he can produce a brilliant bombastic score for Godzilla earlier this year and yet create a score for The Imitation Game, which is the polar opposite in pretty much every single facet, helps to demonstrate why he is one of the best composers working today, very deserving of his Oscar nomination for this and the Grand Budapest Hotel. While the movie is never boring for its 114-minute runtime, it feels like it could maybe have benefited from a couple of additional scenes, particularly towards the end, involving the conflict between Turing and one of his work colleagues whose brother was killed in a U-boat attack, as well as delving deeper into Turing's final days. The reality of what happened to Turing isn't pretty, but is incredibly important to portray, so it is a shame that The Imitation Game does gloss over it slightly, though since the movie is such a tightly focused and perfectly paced experience, such scenes could have caused the movie to drag. It's a tough call, but I would love to see if there is an extended cut out there somewhere. The Imitation Game had the odds in its favour from the beginning by basing itself on a fascinating and incredible individual. Thankfully, the story was also placed in the hands of incredible filmmakers, a stellar cast and a brilliant production team, but it's also a movie with an incredibly strong emotional core and brings to light one of the biggest personal injustices of the 20th century, the downfall of Alan Turing. Seeing him in his final days is devastating, but it's something that needs to be known about. Alan Turing was one of the most influential and important individuals of the past century, but the ultimate irony is that he was condemned because his indisputable contributions to World War II were so secretive in nature that nobody could know the impact he made for a long time. Hopefully The Imitation Game will bring to light his contributions, and while he certainly deserved better than the posthumous pardon he was given a few years ago, it's hard to argue that The Imitation Game isn't a movie worthy of his legacy. I give The Imitation Game 4.5 stars out of 5.
Sometimes it is the people who no one imagines anything of, who do the things that no one can imagine.
Now after that depressing true-to-life story, we have something far more uplifting. We have Selma, which shows the civil rights movement in the 1960s as they get racial equality thanks to Martin Luther King. Because remember folks, Martin Luther King once said, "I have a dream," and then racism was dead forever. Selma.
He's got supporters. Detroit, New York, Los Angeles, inciting large-scale arrests and sympathy marches.
I'm very aware of that, Mr. Hoover. What I do know is he's nonviolent. What I need to know right now, what's Martin Luther King about to do next?
Mr. President, Dr. King is here.
In the mid-1960s, it is officially legal for African Americans to vote. However, due to opposition of the civil rights movement, blacks are still unable to vote due to intimidation tactics and a manipulation of the law. Martin Luther King Jr. pleads to then-President Lyndon B. Johnson to rectify this, but he is unwilling to do so. In order to force the president's hand, Martin Luther King and many of his friends travel to Selma, with plans to stage a massive peaceful march/protest through to Montgomery. It's not long before their plight starts to gain worldwide media attention, and with all the eyes of the world watching Selma, Martin Luther King endeavours to see the march through. Now when it comes to biopics, there's always the tendency to view certain individuals through rose-tinted glasses. Martin Luther King is often remembered by history as a man who used peace to his advantage and always strived to avoid confrontation and violence. A weaker version of Selma would have presented this idealised version of the man, but this is a smarter version, and it seeks to portray Martin Luther King as a master of revolutionary tactics. The reason Martin Luther King chose Selma for the civil rights voting marches was because he knew it was a racially incendiary town. He knew that Governor George Wallace and Sheriff Clark were adamantly opposed to racial equality, with Clark in particular being renowned for racial violence. Martin Luther King used the uneasy tensions in Selma in order to deliberately poke the bear, causing them to retaliate, and due to the presence of the Nobel Peace Prize winner Martin Luther King, as well as the hundreds who gathered for a non-violent protest, the story garnered worldwide media attention. Martin Luther King used this sympathy to manipulate the media in order to bring the plight of African Americans to the public consciousness. It was a brilliant tactic and shows Martin Luther King as not just a peaceful activist, but as an incredibly intelligent psychological opponent for the Southern racists. Selma portrays the indignities forced upon African Americans in the 1960s to an uncompromisingly accurate degree. One of the first scenes has Annie Lee Cooper, played by Oprah Winfrey, make her 5th attempt to register to vote, but is forbidden to do so because she cannot name all 67 county judges in Alabama. The scene is ripped straight out of the history books. The marches themselves and the brutality on display by the police officials in Selma also have very little restraint. Photos of these attacks were broadcast worldwide and printed on the front page of the newspapers in 1965, with many images being disturbingly recreated by Ava DuVernay in the movie. Selma literally transcribes moments from history and lays them bare for the world to revisit with startling clarity and accuracy. And David Oyelowo's performance as Martin Luther King is astonishingly good in that the actor is completely unrecognisable and disappears behind this iconic figure. The voice is near perfect, the inflections and his delivery on the created for the movie speeches are compelling, and you can literally see why thousands of people followed this man and hung onto his every word, and Oyelowo breathes life into someone who has been criminally underrepresented by the movies. Incidentally, yes, I do think he was snubbed for the Oscars. However, David Oyelowo's performance in the characterization of Martin Luther King does bring to light a slight problem with the movie, in that most of the other characters are not fleshed out or as interesting. For example, while Tom Wilkinson makes an impression as President Lyndon B. Johnson, it is dynamic with Martin Luther King that does detract from Selma. Much has been made about Johnson's portrayal in Selma and how he was actually a champion of civil rights, which is why he had such a prominent relationship with Martin Luther King, but in this movie he has that same relationship, but he doesn't want to pass a bill protecting African Americans and allowing them to vote. It's not enough to cripple the film, but it does simplify the conflicts to a confusing degree. In the movie, Lyndon B. Johnson gives no justifiable reason as to why he can't pass this bill. Now, I'm sure he had one in real life, but in Selma, the movie, there is none. This omission is oddly placed, especially considering how accurate and true to life most of the other events in the movie are. Selma is easily Ava DuVernay's most ambitious film to date, and it's gorgeously shot. The quaint town of Selma seems almost idyllic, which makes the barbaric acts seem even more impactful on screen, showing that racism can come from anywhere and is sometimes hiding in plain sight. The costumes and production design brilliantly recreate the 1960s, Jason Moran's score is subtle and leaves an impression at just the right moments with well-placed piano motifs, the lighting is brilliant and the camera work is dynamic. Selma is an incredibly well-assembled movie from a production standpoint, and I personally don't understand the criticisms that it's received about it looking like a TV movie. Selma is an incredibly powerful historical biopic that breaks down the myth of Martin Luther King in order to rebuild him as a flawed but intelligent master manipulator of the media in an attempt to progress the world for the greater good. It's well put together with a revolutionary lead performance by Oscar-snubbed David Oyelowo and confidently directed by fellow Oscar-snub Ava DuVernay. Its portrayal of Lyndon B. Johnson, while not a damnation of the film, is a noticeable oversight, but other than that, Selma is an accurate portrayal of the iconic events that took place in Selma in 1965. But what's most powerful of all is that despite Martin Luther King's closing speech saying that racial equality is approaching, over 50 years later, the events of Selma and the images broadcast around the world are still an all too common occurrence. The movie juxtaposes Martin Luther King's closing speech with lines of text showing what happened to Viola Liuzzo, one of the white visiting peaceful protesters, almost immediately after the speech took place, with the credits playing the award-winning song and Oscar-nominated song Glory by Common and John Legend, making explicit references to Ferguson last year and the continual oppression of African Americans despite the efforts made by the civil rights activists throughout the 21st century. This revolution goes on and on. I give Selma 4.5 stars out of 5.
Looks like an army out there.
This revolution goes on and on. This revolution goes on and on. Mine eyes have seen the glory, 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 hallelujah.
What happens when a man stands up, says enough is enough?
Well, that was a lot of fun, now wasn't it, kids? Next up we have the Stephen Hawking biopic. This can't possibly turn out good, right? You can practically see the Oscar checklist being made, right? You've got a character with a disability, check. A supportive female character, check. Based on a true story, check. A period movie, check. You've got a British film, check. This can't be good, right? Here's the theory of everything.
You don't realise what lies ahead. This is going to be a very heavy defeat.
But I love him, and he loves me. We're going to fight this illness together.
The life story of Stephen Hawking, one of the world's smartest human beings and world-renowned physicist and cosmologist, seems like a recipe for perfect Oscar bait. It's about a story of a man overcoming unfortunate circumstances set in England and based on a true story. The awards practically hand themselves out. It would be so easy on the part of director James Marsh and the screenwriter Anthony McCartan to simply transcribe his incredible life and call it a day, but the theory of everything goes for the smarter approach. Very fitting considering the fact that this is a Stephen Hawking movie. The theory of everything is based off the memoirs of Stephen Hawking's ex-wife Jane, Travelling to Infinity, My Life with Stephen. As a result, this movie seemingly about the life of Stephen Hawking is actually more about Jane than anyone. After all, behind every great man is a great woman. James Marsh, not content with a simple biopic, honestly portrays Stephen Hawking's complicated relationship with his first wife Jane, who, despite getting second billing on the poster, is the true star of the movie thanks to her portrayal by Felicity Jones. Jones gives Jane a stoicism, but endearing warmth that makes her one of the best female characters on screen in a long time. There's a temptation to write supporting female characters as a surrogate for the male lead, but that's the theory of everything's quietly brilliant hook. The two first meet with polar opposite ideologies, and when Stephen is diagnosed with ALS, the reason you were tipping ice buckets on your head last year incidentally, the two vow to make the most of their 2 years together and get married. But Stephen keeps on living. That's inspirational on the part of Stephen Hawking, but for Jane, she finds herself with more than she could ever have bargained for. Jane becomes Stephen's full-time carer and starts to sacrifice her life and her own dreams and ambitions for him and her children. A weaker movie would have painted her as a perfect and noble saint for doing this, but the theory of everything shows Jane's regrets, her temptation towards other men, and her slowly having her spirit drained out of her. She unconditionally loves Stephen and her children, but there are some scenarios in which love does not always conquer. The theory of everything gives the audience one of the most authentic and truthful love stories in modern film, and that truth comes from dissatisfaction. Audiences frequently don't want the truth in their romance media, and that is why terrible, trite romantic comedies continually get made, because audiences like the reassurance and the status quo. But that is not how the world is. But what's equally brilliant is that you never feel resentment towards Jane. You go through this incredible journey with her and utterly sympathise with her position while simultaneously finding her admirable for continuing to fight. While the old age makeup on Felicity Jones doesn't look that convincing towards the end of the movie, Felicity's eyes and expressions sell the life of a person that has been drained by commitment. Of course, most of the attention in the theory of everything has been given to Eddie Redmayne's portrayal of the famous professor, and for very good reason. It cannot be understated how brilliant Redmayne is in this role, and how unrecognisable he is, especially towards the end when you stop seeing the actor and you see the true life figure in his face. One of the biggest hurdles with portraying a sufferer of ALS on film is that it's a progressive disease with numerous complex stages, and since almost every film ever is shot out of sequence, Redmayne must change his physicality from scene to scene. You can see the detail in his performance in chronological order as certain muscles stop functioning at different stages of his life and his speech gradually slurs. I always try to resist using this term, but Redmayne's performance truly is a tour de force. I hate that phrase. And towards the end, when he has to solely communicate through half smiles and his eyes, it becomes clear that we are seeing a career-defining performance. Stephen is also well written in the theory of everything to reflect his well-known sense of humour and impeccable wit as he lives up to his rock star status. This is Redmayne's and Jones's movie, but there are some standout supporting cast members as well. David Thewlis and Charlie Cox are great, but for me the standout supporting role was Stephen's student friend Brian, played by the always underrated Harry Lloyd. Trivia: he played Baines in Doctor Who The Family of Blood and is the great-great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens. Yes, that Charles Dickens. Lloyd doesn't have a large role, but he nails some of the most important scenes of the movie and works incredibly well with Redmayne as a social, if not intellectual, equal. The theory of everything is confidently filmed and stylishly directed by James Marsh, with enough flair and expansive locations to justify a big screen release. A TV movie this ain't, and just like the film's themes, Johan Johansson's brilliant score bucks the Oscar tropes trend by emphasising power and urgency as opposed to sentimentality. Sentimentality is present, but it's deftly handled and confidently manipulated with incredible strings and a brilliant sucker punch of a bass. of Everything books media's expectations of love and relationships by providing an affecting and honest insight into one of recent memory's most unconventional romances. It takes an Oscar-baity concept and contorts it into something genuinely exceptional and powerful, but never saccharine. It's actually amazing that the movie wound up like this, because the trailers indicate a straightforward, inspirational story about being able to overcome anything life throws at you, when David Lewis states in the trailer,
"It has been a great joy to watch this man defy every expectation, both scientific and personal."
It's played like a genuine sentiment in the trailer that will make audience members jaded to this sort of topic in film roll their eyes in resentment, but in the context of the movie, that line is actually massively ironic, as there are many personal expectations that Stephen and Jane simply could not overcome. There's always a problem with making a biopic when the people it's based off of are still alive and potentially kicking when it comes to their portrayal on screen, but The Theory of Everything, despite being about people who are still alive and assisted with the movie, doesn't paint either of its leads as heroes or villains, or as simplistic ciphers, but as human beings in love. But sometimes, love doesn't win. I give The Theory of Everything 5 stars out of 5.
There should be no boundary to human endeavor. However bad life may seem, while there is life, there is hope.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you say something?
I said thank you.
Wow, those last few movies have actually been pretty darn awesome, but we've got one film left. Can it continue this great streak of Best Picture nominees? Well, we have Whiplash, a movie about artistry and music, but let's find out if this Best Picture nominee can hit just the right notes. Here's Whiplash.
We got Buddy Rich here. Little trouble there. You're rushing. Here we go. 5, 6, and... Were you rushing or were you dragging?
I don't know.
If you deliberately sabotage my band, I will gut you like a pig. Oh, my dear God. Are you one of those single-tier people? You are a worthless pansy ass who is now weeping and slobbering all over my drum set like a 9-year-old girl.
Whiplash follows Andrew Neiman, a jazz drummer studying at one of the best music schools in America. He quickly catches the attention of the enigmatic conductor of the lead band, Terence Fletcher, who gives Andrew a place in his band. Once he gets involved, however, it's revealed that Terence is akin to a musical drill sergeant who frequently abuses, insults, and belittles his band members until they attain perfection. Andrew's social life starts to deteriorate, including a relationship that barely got started before he calls it quits, as well as his family life, and his goal is to not just be great, but to be one of the greats. Now, what's interesting about Whiplash is that, in the end, it's not a movie about jazz, it's not even a movie about music, it's about two titanic personalities going toe-to-toe with each other. I don't think I've ever seen a movie accurately portray the irresistible force paradox, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and force is a very accurate term when it comes to J.K. Simmons' career-best work as Terence Fletcher. While Miles Teller is incredible in the movie, it's Simmons getting all of the awards buzz, and for very good reason. He is a force of nature in Whiplash, an intimidating master manipulator who feels like a hurricane personified. On the surface, Terence just seems like an R-rated J. Jonah Jameson from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. Terence even opens one of his band's practice sessions with "Listen up, cocksuckers," and proceeds to kick out one of the band members because the band member thought he was out of tune. His power over the band members is exacerbated by shots of the members standing to attention as he walks into the practice room, frozen with fear on the off chance that he might potentially throw something very heavy at them. J.K. Simmons is an incredible presence on screen, and everything from the way he grabs the air when he wants the band to stop playing, to his subtle hand gestures when conducting, shows Simmons completely disappearing into the role. However, there are also frequent moments where Terence drops his harsh exterior to display real emotional depth, which prevents him from just being a character destined to feature prominently in online best movie insult compilations.
Everybody remember, Lincoln Center and its ilk use these competitions to decide who they're interested in and who they're not. And I am not going to have my reputation in that department tarnished by a bunch of fucking limp dick, sour note, flattered on their girlfriend's flexible tempo dipshits. Got it? One more thing. Eugene, give me that. If I ever find one of these lying around again, I swear to fucking God, I will stop being so polite. Get the fuck out of my sight before I demolish you. Stage right, in order, now. I can still fucking see you, Mini-Me!
One scene where he explains his motivation to Andrew initially seems like it's the movie trying to spell out its message and moral while displaying a softer side to him. A weaker movie would have just left it at that, but Whiplash uses this momentary weakness to cleverly flip the tables later on with a single word: upswinging. While most of the buzz and attention is being given to J.K. Simmons, Miles Teller does an admirable job in matching his intensity. Teller is really put through the ringer in Whiplash, with frequent intense drumming sequences, as well as confrontations with Simmons, who has been acting for even longer than Teller has been alive, but the two display formidable chemistry. Whiplash is more akin to a psychological war movie and a game of wits, rather than a horror movie about an unstable teacher. The amount of punishment Andrew inflicts on himself and the dedication he shows through his ambition makes it look like he's been put through a boxing match, as he covers his drum kit in blood, sweat and tears, literally, while playing as if his life depended on it. Despite Whiplash being the second shortest Best Picture nominee when it comes to runtime, as it's 6 minutes longer than the Grand Budapest Hotel, the movie is an incredibly intense and draining cinematic experience. The plot is incredibly well structured and, like a great jazz number, takes unexpected turns just when you feel complicit in what's going on. It does a great job of getting into Andrew's head and showing why he's so desperate for the approval of a potentially homicidal person, thanks to the lack of passion in his normal life with his family. This is, first and foremost, a story about artists wanting appreciation and respect on their own level. Andrew comes from a family that idolizes their sports fanatic children and don't understand jazz music, or at least not to the extent that Andrew does. Andrew lives and breathes jazz, and even though Terence Fletcher berates him constantly and pushes him more than should be allowed, Andrew kind of relishes the opportunity to prove himself to someone as immersed in that form of music as him. This creates a fascinating power dynamic between the two, and who is really in control during their metaphorical sparring matches, which makes Whiplash a breathless and exuberant watch. The music sequences are as thrilling and as intense as most action sequences in recent memory, without a single punch being thrown, and in terms of heart-in-your-throat musical set pieces with dizzying camera movements, impeccable editing and sound mixing, it is one of the best cinematic accomplishments in tension since 2014's Grand Piano, in which Damien Chazelle, the writer and director of Whiplash, also wrote the screenplay for. Yeah, this guy's gonna do alright. Whiplash, despite its tiny budget, as it's the cheapest of all of the Best Picture nominees in terms of production budget, is an absolute technical marvel. Its dizzying yet controlled camera work, clever shot placement and composition, as well as terrific use of lighting, makes the scenes pop in the appropriate way. Slow motion is cleverly used, and with its great use of locations and costumes, the world of jazz music is simultaneously tantalizing and intimidating, but it's the editing where Whiplash truly excels, and if it doesn't take home a trophy for either visual editing or sound mixing, it will have been completely robbed, though for certain technical categories the Academy just seem to hand out the Best Editing Oscar to whoever shows up, which is an absolute shame, because it truly is a craft and a labour of love, and it shouldn't be seen as a consolation prize. The music sequences have been cut cleverly and polished to a mirror shine, with many cuts and transitions being made to the beats of Andrew's drumming. The audio levels and sound mixing are perfectly manipulated during these sequences, and when you combine that with the great cinematography and performances, as well as the emotional context for these brilliant characters, watching Whiplash is almost akin to a religious experience. Whiplash is, without question, the best movie up for contention at the Academy Awards this year. It's a raw, visceral, intense, powerful, and thought-provoking analysis on artists and suffering for your craft. Even if Whiplash does not agree with the almost torturous conditions Terence puts Andrew through on a regular basis, it does make a strong case for that kind of approach, even if it's just for self-fulfillment. With two amazing lead performances from Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, Whiplash is an incredible movie, and it is the one that I will be rooting for come February 22nd. I give Whiplash 5 stars out of 5.
Are you a rusher? Or are you a dragger? Or are you gonna be on my time?
You're gonna be on your time.
Keep playing! Keep playing! Keep playing!
So there we go, all 8 Best Picture nominees, and because I saw all 8 of them, that means I have a more informed opinion on who should win than the Academy themselves do. That sounds like it should be a joke, but that's probably depressingly true. So how did this year's contenders stack up? Disregarding all of the other categories, this is possibly the best lineup since 2010 when it comes to actual quality. Yes, it's terrible that American Sniper got nominated, but it's not unheard of for terrible movies to get nominated. Just look at The Blind Side or American Hustle. Plus, we all know that American Sniper only got nominated because none of the Academy voters wanted to be that guy who didn't vote for what could be Clint Eastwood's final film. But it does have to be said, American Sniper, a racist, xenophobic, pro-war movie, getting nominated the same year as a Martin Luther King biopic, and 1 year after 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture, that is bullshit. But aside from that, we have some quality films here, and not just quality, but a diverse approach to filmmaking. You've got your gritty films, your period films, contemporary art house, covering a broad range of topics. Growing up, homosexuality mixed with espionage, disability and romance, racial segregation, pro-war gun porn, nostalgia mixed with class, music, and even Broadway. The only spectrum this year's nominees fail to represent is in the realm of female characters, as all 8 Best Picture nominees are led by males, and I think that needs to change in future. But what's surprising is that Oscar movies are normally safe and uplifting, but some of the better movies in this category are anything but that. Selma draws a devastating parallel towards 1960s racism and modern day racism, while also deconstructing Martin Luther King as a flawed individual. Whiplash, despite its brilliant insulting comedy from J.K. Simmons, is not an uplifting movie. The Theory of Everything and The Imitation Game are emotionally devastating true life stories that challenge our perceptions of war and romance, and even Birdman's ending leaves enough to interpretation that you could perceive it as a sad ending. The only movies that don't quite fit this mould are Boyhood, which is essentially 3 hours of white people problems, American Sniper, which is militaristic, simplistic pro-war propaganda, and The Grand Budapest Hotel, which felt too stylized and detached to have any sort of emotional resonance. That latter one especially can be chalked up to me, and like I said, Birdman's ending relies solely on your interpretation, but Boyhood and American Sniper definitely fit the Oscar mould. It's no wonder that those two are actually the weakest of the bunch, but the fact that the majority of films in this category actually challenge that mainstream perception of Oscar movies not challenging their audiences with complex feelings was actually put to the test this year, and I find that massively refreshing. But let's not kid around here, we all know that this is a 2-horse race between Boyhood and Birdman, and like I said earlier, I don't think they're the best nominees, but I can at least understand the recognition. Despite Boyhood being utterly bland, its 12 years conceit is commendable, and while Birdman may have its head placed very firmly up its echo-chambery ass, it is at least incredibly well made and well acted. But a part of me is disappointed that movies like The Theory of Everything, Selma, The Imitation Game and Whiplash won't walk home with much this weekend, as well as the lack of nominations for Nightcrawler and The Lego Movie, but something tells me that in 4 or 5 years' time, maybe 10 years' time, we'll be talking about those films as crowning achievements, whereas movies like Boyhood and American Sniper will be quickly forgotten. The cream will rise to the top, but hopefully one day the Academy will be the ones to recognise that first. With all that being said, my name is Trilbee, and be sure to hit that like button because it really helps me out. Be sure to subscribe for more movie related content so you can keep updated on when I make new videos, and you can also support these videos financially on Patreon for exclusive content. But more importantly, what do you guys and girls think of the Best Picture nominee lineup, or pretty much any other category? Please let me know in the comment section below. What was snubbed? What do you want to win? What do you think will win? What do you think should win? Things like that. Please, let's get a discussion going in the comment section because those are awesome. You guys are awesome, and I love having conversations with you. So be sure to sound off in the comment section below. And that's everything. So enjoy the Oscars. I'll be there. I'll be live tweeting the event. I'll be watching it live. You'll be able to follow me tweet on the event at Trilbee Reviews. So be sure to follow me, do that. That should be a lot of fun. And I shall see you guys next time.
Trilbee.